Okay, in our third chapter and last chapter on how we explain our own behavior, we want to look a little bit more at achievement and learning. And I want to contrast basically the ideas that Seligman put forward, right? This kind of right and wrong way of explaining failure, of the right and wrong way of explaining success, with a very different view that takes critically on the ideas that Seligman put forward. Just to repeat, right? Seligman says, like, when something bad happens in your life, you should find an external, for instance, cause for that. Okay, it was just bad luck, it was the other person's fault, it's just a stupid teacher, a weird exam, not my fault, right? And if something good happens, then you should take all the credit. It's like me, and it will always be me. And so you take full credit for that, and you attribute it to something internal, global, and stable, right? Your overall fantastic personality, for instance. But that also, if you kind of feel, right, if you think about it, it all might have really beneficial consequences for emotions in the short term, but might also really stunt your growth, right? If you never take responsibility for your failures, how will you learn? And this kind of is contrasted often with this idea of like focusing on a locus of control. Very early on, Rutter, but then championed this idea that the most important dimension for explanations is whether we have internal or external, whether we take responsibility or not. So there is like, here's a scale by Paul Huys, who kind of captured the as a way of measuring whether you have predominantly an internal or an external locus of control. So if I have an internal locus of control, then I would endorse statements like, I can usually achieve what I want if I work hard for it, or I can learn almost anything if I set my mind to it. If I have an external locus of control, I would say something like, bad luck has sometimes prevented me from achieving things, right? It's not me, it's something external. Most of what happens, not of happens, of what happens in my career is beyond my control. So this is an external locus of control. So early on in the kind of achievement and learning literature, there was a strong emphasis on the importance of an internal focus of control. Many research, especially in research in personality psychology, kind of endorses that idea. People who have a strong internal locus of control, people who think that they cause good and bad things in their life, people who take responsibility for their own failures, those are the people who are often more successful. Yes, they're also at higher risk for being stressed or at higher risk of feeling depressed because they take responsibility, but they also are kind of like foster their own or create their own successes. So an internal focus of control was very much here this idea. But you can even like this internal focus of control can be so much more can have so much more facets, and that is something that Carol Dweck really championed, and I want to talk a little bit about this next. And weirdly, in our introduction book to social psychology, Carol Dweck is not named once, which I think is really shocking, because if you would ask me who's the most important social psychologist, who's maybe one of the most important psychologists of the last 20 or 30 years, I think in terms of influential outside of psychology, it's hard to see how anyone can top Carol Dweck. And I'll introduce you to her kind of theory and how she built it from attributions to goals to mindsets, and how this tells us something about the limitations also of attribution theories. So Carol Dweck in the 70s did, as everyone else, attributional research. She was interested in how children learn, and she would give children hard or impossible to solve puzzles. And she would kind of observe and listen to them, what they would say. So some children would kind of say like, ooh, it seems like I need to learn a little bit more. This is interesting, when in situations when they failed or when they couldn't solve the problem, right? They kind of attributed it to effort, something internal, but kind of controllable and temporary, right? So the idea here is like they responded to mishaps, to failure, to difficulties with this idea of like, okay, I need to invest my effort. I need to figure out how this is working. They persisted in their attempts to solve this problem. But there was another group of children who, when they realized that they're failing in front of the adults, they would quickly stop. They would kind of stop working on these problems. They would try to go back to easier problems. They would kind of say things that are almost like about saving face. There's like, I don't know what is going on with me today. I'm not feeling good. Something like that, where it's almost like they want to get out of the situation and they want to save their own face, their own evaluation in front of these grown-ups. So she kind of like thought like, oh, it seems like that in order to persist and to learn and to develop interest, the most important distinction is not between internal and external, but it's like whether I'm internal and something controllable versus internal and uncontrollable, something like effort versus ability attribution. So this is how she kind of started. And then she wondered, well, why do some of these kids have these attributions and some of these other kids have those attributions? And then it turns out she looked at kind of goals. Goals is another concept that was after attributions in the 90s and 2000s, super popular. And she saw like there were these two different types of goals. The kids with these the kids with these kind of effort attributions, they had what she called learning goals. So when they ask, what do you want to achieve here? She's like, oh, I came in here to learn something. I came in here to improve my skills. I want to kind of develop my skills. So in an academic setting, this would be those kids or the students among you guys who would kind of send me, hey, I think this is really important. Can you send me something more? They would seek out feedback in order to learn more about social psychology. But then there was this other set of kids, and these were those who had these kind of ability attributions, and they wanted achievement. They wanted to basically demonstrate their abilities. They wanted to show that they're good. Okay, so this is like where it's like you have these two types of attributions who reflected two different types of goals, learning and performance goals, kind of showing that you can, like wanting to learn something, doing the activity in order to grow and learn, or doing the activity in order to perform well. So very different two types of goals. And then she wondered, like, why is that the case? Why have some of these children these goals and why have some of these children these other goals? And then she found out, like, when talking to them, that some of them basically kind of thought about their own intelligence, their own learning as a muscle. They thought, like, okay, the way intelligence works, the way achievement works is that the more you invest, the more you kind of learn, the stronger you grow. And hence they would have they had the theory, which she later then called, it used to be called the lay theory. Now it's called a mindset, a growth mindset. They thought okay, my intelligence works like a muscle. Hence, whenever I go into a situation, I want to train my muscle. And if I train my muscle, then I put myself in difficult situation and try that it grows basically. And when I can't do it, that tells me that I have to train harder. In contrast to that, there were those who had kind of like a fixed mindset. They believed that basically intelligence is something fixed that can't be developed, right? Now, any type of activity would basically kind of show you performance, whether you have it or not, whether you have this amount of intelligence that works or not. And by doing so, they would seek out situations where they can demonstrate their ability. Okay, and hence, if the ability or if the activity would tell them that they lack the ability, then they would withdraw. This would also have kind of important implications for their self-view and how hard they try when facing difficulties. So why am I telling you that? I mean, in one way, this is kind of like the most influential theory, I think, at this point in educational psychology. So whenever this is like how the teachers of my children are trained to talk to our children. They're trained to praise effort and not ability. They're trying to teach the children that your intelligence works like a muscle, is not something fixed like the genes. And if you have that, then they set the right goals, and with the right goals, they set themselves. They show the right explanations for difficulties and failures, right? So there's almost like the attribution become a cause or are caused by the theory and the goals people have. They're not themselves the driver, rather they're being driven by the beliefs people have about their own intelligence. And that kind of hints at a bigger picture that I wanted to kind of stop with here. And when we think about our own, explaining our own behavior, that nowadays most people think that attributions are really interesting, but they're more like a symptom, not a cause. Okay, so you can think about Carol Dweck here on the top. She has this, her theory is basically that people have different mindsets, whether they think about your intelligence, their own intelligence, as something you can grow or something that it fixed that leads to different goals, and these goals lead to different attributional patterns. So the attributions we have indicate something bigger about what we believe is the way the world works, right? Think about our first session. It's very much important, or our very first introduction, right? As a social psychologist, that you think about the beliefs and theories people have, and that causes them to show certain behaviors, and this is very much in line with that. Learned helplessness is a different is a similar example. Seligman and Dweck clashed about the importance of internal versus external, while Carol Dweck really believes in the importance of attributing internally failures and difficulties. Seligman really believed in the importance of external attributions when facing difficulties and failures. The learned helplessness theory, right, is kind of often now, if you have depression, research on depression, or you get that taught, it's kind of like a historical anecdote. And the reason why is that we think that these attributional patterns that you see, this kind of self-serving pattern of the non-depressed person and the opposite of the depressed person, is a symptom of underlying beliefs and theories that these depressed people have. It is not really the cause, but the explanations for the causes are driven by something deeper within the depressed person.